it is actually the peaceful who always make the greatest change. And it is those who take up arms who generally, especially in our context where we're going to be incredibly outgunned, incredibly outmanned, it immediately, whether people like it or not, and I know this is a controversial conversation, it immediately illegitimizes and discredits our movement. And it is those who stand in peace and those who stand poised with compassion, even in the face of gunfire, that make the massive change in the world.
Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. Hey everybody, I'm sick. I am coming to you from the inside of the van right now, a cold, icy van that's in the shade on the sidewalk, surrounded by dogs and trams and passing cars on a cobblestone street. So given all of that, I am going to try to make this podcast introduction as short as possible. Times are crazy, things are weird, and more than ever, it's important to talk about love, beauty, and solidarity. And that's why I am honored to be joined by Indigenous scholar, scientist, musician, and activist, Dr. Lyla June Johnston. This is a conversation that I had been waiting for a long time to have, so I'm happy that we finally had it, and I can release this episode out to you. We talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about nonviolence, collective power, kinship, land and indigenous food systems, allyship, and mainly, I think this podcast does good work at dispelling the myth of humans as just a disease on this planet. We are so much more than that, and Lyla June speaks beautifully to this point. So I hope you enjoy this talk. All the links that you'll need to find Lyla will be in the show notes. If you're interested in learning more about allyship with Native peoples, like I was, I encourage you to check out her course on building solidarity with Indigenous communities. I'll also include a link for that in the show notes. So as always, be good to one another and enjoy the talk. So Dr. Lyla June Johnston, welcome to the Passing Through podcast. It's an honor to finally sit down with you.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's something I've been really looking forward to because I first encountered your work several years ago when you were speaking at a summit, and you offered a compelling alternative to the idea that humans are a plague on the planet. And you were saying that instead of that narrative, we could be allies and we could be caretakers, not 8 billion problems, but 8 billion solutions. And this was moving and powerful to me personally. And so when we first scheduled this episode, which was a while ago already, I was excited to talk with you about Indigenous land systems and foodways, reciprocity and kinship and allyship with Native peoples. And I still want to talk about all of those things. But lately things have gotten pretty fucking unhinged, I would say. And we were just alluding to that a little bit before we started recording. And right now, reality is so darkly disorienting and depraved that trying to even talk about current events with someone who isn't aware of what's going on makes me feel delusional at best, or like a crazed conspiracy theorist at worst. Between what's happening with ICE, the invasion of Venezuela, the abduction of their president,
the ongoing genocide, Jared Kushner's plan for New Gaza, the surveillance and AI with Palantir, and the really horrific news that just came out about the Epstein files and the child sex cult of the elites, the rich and powerful, that the Department of Justice just released. And so as all of these things are swirling around, and I sound like a QAnon conspiracy theorist even now to myself, how do you make sense of this moment right now?
Well, my friend Akbik, she's from Alaska, what we now call Alaska. She's an Indigenous leader in that area. She said that her elder told her a very beautiful thing that really moved me. And he said that he thinks what's going on is there's so much good in the world, so much beauty trying to blossom, so much change trying to happen, that evil is rising up and trying to squash it with even more might and effort than usual. And I really loved that framing because it actually felt right in my mind, because I look around and I also see so much beauty. I see so much power. I see so many innovative new systems trying to supplant old systems that were predicated on all kinds of things that we are evolving out of, such as patriarchy, human centricism, and the notion that only three-dimensional things that can be measured are what matter, and moving out of these old paradigms into new paradigms that are about honoring the voice of the voiceless, not only including human beings, but animals and plants who cannot vote,
Mm-hmm.
who cannot legislate, but still have lives and families and worlds of their own that matter. And so there's all kinds of exciting things going on, including a lot of interfaith movements to unite the religions. And I guess that's an age-old story that both are very strongly operating at all times. The ones that center love and the ones that center fear disguised as a desire for power. So I think that can't be forgotten either, that there's so much beauty trying to happen. And we can't let the great them, right? The quote unquote them, we can't let them, whoever they are, whatever it is, maybe it's our own selves, we can't let anything trick us into thinking that our power doesn't matter as people who center love, that our power is impotent as people who center love, and that we have to keep remembering that this wave that we've been building for decades and decades and centuries and millennia, it matters. And standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who've been working on this forever too, it matters. And we have to keep going. We cannot stop, especially now. We cannot stop. We must continue to remind the world that this is what we stand for and this is what we will work to build.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I like that rooting down into love and ancestors and recognizing that as much as we see shadow proliferate, shadow could only exist in the presence of light, right? So both are present at the same time. And I guess you inspired a question there when you spoke about love, and it's a tension that I have inside of myself when I see what's happening, because I believe that nonviolence and love and trying to rehumanize the monstrous, maybe that's a way that I would put it, is valuable and important work. But this other part of me fears, you know, could the monstrous trample over, if everyone's proclaiming love with their hands outstretched and making peace offerings, but they're just toppled over and gunned down, and what is the best path forward in the face of this kind of state-sanctioned violence?
Well, let's do a thought experiment. If peace is not the answer, then what would be the alternative? And what would be the result of that alternative? I'm asking you, just as a thought experiment.
Yeah, I'm and like I said, I guess I do believe peace is the answer, but this other part of me
No, I
that's
know. We're just experimenting.
yeah, this other part of me that's suspicious wonders maybe certain forms of resistance are warranted under certain circumstances, certain situations to like repel or push back a force that has gotten too powerful. Like if I think about it in terms of like, let's say an invasive species, there's an invasive moth that was introduced by a French guy into North America that started destroying oaks, and no action was taken for decades. And these moths proliferated and destroyed the ecosystem and still continue to threaten oaks as they expand. And if I look at this in a similar way, if we kind of do nothing, does this allow this darkness to kind of deepen and thicken and spread itself deeper?
Well, by allowing the moth to proliferate, you're not serving the moth either. It eats its own host and then it collapses. But the interactions between a human and a moth are different than the interactions between a human for different reasons. And it is actually the peaceful who always make the greatest change. And it is those who take up arms who generally, especially in our context where we're going to be incredibly outgunned, incredibly outmanned, it immediately, whether people like it or not, and I know this is a controversial conversation, it immediately illegitimizes and discredits our movement.
Yes.
And it is those who stand in peace and those who stand poised with compassion, even in the face of gunfire, that make the massive change in the world. And one example is the Sand Creek Massacre. This was a horrific massacre, and the Cheyenne people, who are my father's mother's people, they decided to turn in their weapons because they were tired of fighting. They didn't want any more bloodshed. They didn't want to stoop to the level of the U.S. military. They were tired of physical altercations. They surrendered themselves. And at this time, the U.S. cavalry came in and massacred hundreds of men, women, and children, knowing that they were surrendered, knowing that they were unarmed. And it was this moment, ironically, of bloodshed of Cheyenne people that is the reason why there is even a drop of Cheyenne blood left on the planet. Because it was this event that changed American policy forever. From a policy of extermination, it no longer was acceptable to exterminate Indigenous peoples. And I know that's a low bar, but that's where we were at in the 1800s. And because of the way the Cheyenne carried themselves is the reason there is a drop of blood, of Indigenous blood left in this continent, arguably. Because that was the day when the real savage was revealed. Who was the savage? And we cannot reveal that if we don't stand deeply in our values. And I know that's not fair. I know many people would disagree with me, and I welcome you to disagree with me. But this is what has been proven time and time and time again. And because of the way my Indigenous ancestors carried themselves, I can walk into almost any room today and command immediate respect before I even open my mouth. And that has nothing to do with me. I didn't even earn it. It's simply because people remember Indigenous peoples the way they remember them because of how we carried ourselves in the face of violent oppression. And again, I'm not saying this is fair. My own ancestors, over 10,000 of them were held in a concentration camp where they endured unspeakable torture for 4 years just outside of Albuquerque from 1864 to 1868. And that scar, we still carry that scar. And so we've been through unimaginable suffering, but we come out the other end with our hearts intact and a prayer on our lips. And that to me is the greatest victory. And that is what I think we're being asked to do, and what I think the state of Minnesota has exemplified as well. Peaceful protests, even being egged on a million times. They never engaged in the murder of anyone. And in fact, they were murdered. And look what it's done to the world. I'm not saying we have to sacrifice ourselves for this, but it has altered policy 1,000 times more than if they had taken up arms.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing some context about your ancestors and where you're from. I guess this could be a bridge into the topics that I did want to speak about, the ones that I had mentioned at the start of the conversation, because we're kind of circling around all of these big arms, all these big tentacles of the poly crisis. We're focusing in on like imperialism and coloniality and violence and extraction and all of this stuff. And one of the questions I had for you was, what do you see as the biggest spiritual or ecological fault lines of our times now, today?
Well, I think that love is still the answer. Sorry, I know I'm repeating myself, but I also believe that this is Creator's world, which is also a controversial thing to say, or not, maybe not controversial, but debatable topic. But Creator has seen the rise and fall of many civilizations that sought to be empires, and it's the same lesson again and again, which is that they always fall. I'm not saying we're not confronted with incredible dangers right now. We are. And if we stick to love, I have deep faith that we will see it through. And I think that love involves not only protecting our neighbors and even protecting our enemies, which is other controversial thing to say.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm always in the middle of these, because love has been challenged and denigrated throughout the millennia, and I can understand why from some perspectives, but loving our enemies doesn't mean making space for them, but it means praying for them, and it means working to prevent them from doing something that their souls will regret later. So preventing and obstructing our enemies is an act of love for them. And by enemies, I mean our relatives who have forgotten that no amount of self-gain is worth another's suffering. And when we forget that, we're a very lost soul. And when we even purposefully inflict suffering to profit, that's a very, very lost soul. Those of us who have decided that that's wrong and that we will not go along with that, we absolutely must unify. We absolutely must obstruct. We absolutely must revoke our participation from these systems. We absolutely must be diligent, disciplined, devoted, and coherent in our organizing. Lovingly, gently, but very coherently. And we will make mistakes. I've made mistakes, and I've learned from them, and our future generations will learn from them. But we must try, and we must try lovingly and decisively and strategically. And so what I mean by that is, if we all stopped using Meta, or even a third of us stopped using Meta, much of Mark Zuckerberg's wealth would evaporate overnight.
Mm-hmm.
All of his wealth is tied up in the market share value of his company. And the day we stop using it, the day he loses, if everyone quit Meta today, which I know is pie in the sky, but for sake of argument, if we did, he would lose about 98% of his net worth. All of these people depend on our participation. And we have incredible power as a people that if and when we ever decide to revoke our participation in mass, we will remember who is actually holding the true power. We are. And so I think we can do these types of things. It's like a bully on the playground, right? Imagine a bully kicking Sally, kicking Jim, throwing dirt at Bill, and beating kids up. And even the teachers are now complicit and corrupted in the system. What on earth could those kids who are getting beat up do? Well, for one thing, they could all get up, stand together, and walk off the playground, for one thing. They can revoke their participation from the system, and they can leave. And they can say, no, we're not going to sit around in spaces where we get abused. That's number one, right? And we are all metaphorically sitting around in digital spaces where we are not only being abused, but where we are enabling the abuse of others. And so we actually have incredible power. And I think we're finally pushed to the edge where we're going to actually use it. We're getting there. It takes a lot, apparently, for an American just to decide that they're going to do something. But we're getting there. And I think the midterms are really important to flip. And I'm speaking not only as a person who doesn't like Democratic Party, but also a person who, people who are supposedly in the Republican Party are also dissatisfied. We're all dissatisfied with this. But step one is we have to remove the person who stands to destroy all of it and assume all of it for himself. We have to remove that person. That is step one.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to spin off of on there, and I'm trying to think of what's the best avenue to explore. I liked what you said about love and, loving our enemies, and it reminded me of this James Baldwin quote where he says, "Love has never been a popular movement." And there's a lot of truth in that because, as you said, people get angry when you talk about loving your enemies and treating them with kindness, and it's hard for people to fathom giving love to someone who is intent on destroying or harming them. And you mentioned some ways that people can do that. They can vote. They can peacefully obstruct. The general strike that they're trying to get up off the ground in Minnesota is a beautiful way that people can come together and unite against the schoolyard bully and go somewhere else, leave the playground. So I love what you're describing here. But the thing that came to me is it possible to stay in the schoolyard and somehow rehabilitate the bully? Because I have this tension when I think about social media. Instagram is a meta company. And am I participating in that playground scheme of exploitation and extraction and violence just by virtue of me being on the platform? Or is it possible for me to be on that platform and be a kind of beacon of light and hope and solidarity with others? Maybe it's not an either or thing. Maybe both are true at the same time, but I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
We absolutely need an alternative to Instagram. We need an alternative to Facebook. Obviously, we need an alternative to TikTok. These digital spaces have worked wonders for us to learn, communicate, grow, but they are predicated on our purposefully making us addicted to them. They're predicated on dividing us purposefully to increase attention and revenue. They're predicated on the abuse of minors who have been systematically exposed to things through social media that is abusive to them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a broken playground, and it does not deserve our presence at all. Now, the problem is we don't have a viable alternative.
Yeah.
But we will, and Europe's working on some. Upscroll is an interesting phenomenon where it got like over 1 million users overnight. But Upscroll is sort of lacking some of features that would have otherwise made it very popular, even more popular, I should say. And so imagine a social media app that actually protects your soul and doesn't want you on there 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a social media app that reinvests all of its proceeds and profits into ecological restoration projects. Imagine a social media app that fosters conversation instead of fostering silos and divisions and profiting off of those silos. Imagine a social media app that protects children and has strict ways of identifying and giving consequences to those groups that do abuse children by showing them inappropriate images, or just simply not allowing children under 16, as Australia has, as France has, to even be on these things. That's how toxic this thing is, that Australia and France just banned it for any person under the age of 16. That's how terribly damaging this playground is. So no, there is no reform of this. Even if you could reform it, I don't think it deserves to be reformed. Now, the problem is, again, we don't have that bright, shiny, beautiful alternative yet. But we desperately need it. And any business person with half a brain would jump on it because they would make a really popular company.
Yeah. And then a question that just sprang up to me there at the end is our larger system, this colonialist dominator system that we're inside of, does that even enable, it seems to not even encourage that type of platform to emerge. And I wonder, is the system itself so corrosive and so toxic right now that there would need to be massive system overhauls in order for that platform to emerge?
I think it could emerge, actually. I think it would require a strong alliance between countries, governments, nonprofits, people with expertise to protect it, because I'm certain Meta would go after it in any way it possibly could. But with enough alliances built up at the gate, it's really hard to take something down. But yeah, as you're saying, that larger capitalistic system, which some people feel like if you speak poorly about capitalism, you're defiling some sacred thing. But capitalism really harms the people who celebrate it deeply in many different ways. And ultimately, it incentivizes profit above all else, which 50% of the time is okay, but the other 50% leaves us sacrificing people for the sake of profit. Not only sacrificing them, but being legally obligated to sacrifice them for the sake of profit, to maximize shareholder value. So my apologies to anyone who is a proponent of capitalism. I promise you, I'm not trying to be scary at all. I promise you, I'm just trying to protect people, organisms, life over some random shareholder value. That's all I'm saying. I think that, yeah, we need a system overhaul, obviously, but I think that's what we were working towards. And that's what I mean. Step one is step one. We have to remove people who are making it impossible just to get up in the morning and function, and people who are denormalizing any kind of care and basic, like you can't even say the word woman anymore. You know, like they're scrubbing any government grant funding that has the word woman in it. Any government grant, which is, by the way, we all came here from a woman. So if you're scrubbing out women, you are scrubbing out life. And
Yeah.
that includes you guys. Sorry. So, and yes, we need a system overhaul, but it's sort of like hierarchy of needs. Like first things first, we have to protect people from, we have to at least protect the basic things first. And that means really, really doing this purple revolution, uniting the red and the blue, the Republicans and the Democrats, and saying,
Hmm.
at the very least, what we do agree on is that autocracy is not what we want. And we have to unite against that. And then we have to create, then we can start creating, unfortunately, because we have much more important things to focus on than autocracy. But unfortunately, that's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you were saying about capitalism not just destroying humans, but it's destroying all persons, right? The human persons, non-human persons, the landscape, and talking about women and mothers, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, the most important woman for all of us. I think probably whether you're a Democrat or Republican or anarcho-syndicalist or whatever you are, you would agree that clean water, clean soil, clean air, thriving, flourishing nature is desirable. But currently, seeing land as private property, a thing that we can extract from, all of this entire way of being just disrupted these systems, not materially, but spiritually and relationally. And this is actually at the heart of what I wanted to speak to you about. And you used the term before that I wanted to come back to, socio-ecological systems. And I think maybe centering on this can be a bridge to get those people, no matter how different they think they are from one another, to realize that actually most of us have shared interests because we want to enter into relationship with this beautiful world around us. And so I'm wondering if you think that this could be the way to win people's hearts over, right? Because I think most people would agree that they want those things. They want clean water, they want clean air. And for some reason, this capitalist structure prevents that from happening and accelerates the destruction of our world.
Yes, but I don't want people to think that we cannot have thriving economies and protect the environment at the same time, because not only can we, but that's the most efficient way to have a thriving economy.
Hmm.
And that was my PhD topic, was Indigenous food systems, where I was overjoyed to see dozens and dozens of cases where Indigenous peoples created thriving food economies, while at the same time, and actually through the implementation and the creation of those food economies, catalyze increasing biodiversity, catalyze improved ecosystem health. So sometimes it is through the very act of our economic activities that we regenerate the earth, and vice versa. Through the regeneration of the earth, our economic activities stimulated. And so that's a big myth that I'm trying to bust, is this notion that the quote unquote economy, whatever that nebulous, vague term means, and but I think at its core, it means, do we have food on the table? Do we have shelter? Do we have clothing? Do we have joy? Do we have basic comfort?
Hmm.
Um, the economy has never been at odds with the environment, ever. It has always been a win-win situation. And my ancestors have proven this time and time again. You can read my almost 400-page dissertation about Indigenous nations creating beautiful economies while simultaneously being a keystone species that allowed these systems to flourish. And so that's the danger of pitting capitalism against nature, although I think it's perfectly right to do that, is that you accidentally get people thinking that the economy is against nature as well, when it's not. It's actually, it goes hand in hand. So, for example, in Hawaii, the Ahupua'a system, that is a watershed agricultural system, and it goes from the peak to the ocean. Every layer of the altitudes of this mountain are a different eco zone or agricultural zone. And the lowland zone is where they will plant the lo'i, the kalo fields, which is a tuber that they eat that is delicious and a really important part of their economy and their diet. The kalo, aka taro root. These lo'i fields, these naturally irrigated from the water that flows down the mountain, these fields are prime nesting grounds for the endangered a'eo. The a'eo is a beautiful white bird that is endangered, and it's mostly endangered because colonial systems wiped out this ancient agricultural system that the birds depend on for their nesting grounds. So isn't it beautiful that we can both farm food that nourishes our bodies and creates a large amount of the caloric base of the Hawaiian diet and nutrition system, and at the very same time expand nesting grounds for this endangered bird? I think that's the definition of symbiosis. And Indigenous nations, not all of us were perfect, I'm not saying that, but many of them had found a homeostasis where where they strived to find these balances of symbiosis through trial and error. We made many mistakes throughout our history, and that's how we learned that we had to always honor the plants and the animals as our elders if we had any shot at a thriving economy. And conversely, if we do honor the plants and animals, we will have a overwhelming abundance, an overwhelming wealth.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really potent distinction that you're making there, that these things don't need to be diametrically opposed. You can achieve symbiosis through them because we have evidence that this people were doing this. So yeah, thank you for that. And this idea of our kin and our elders, we see this across Indigenous worldviews the world over. There's this awareness that these are our relatives, they aren't resources. And I wonder, for someone that hears that and thinks that it's difficult for a person to understand that water is an ancestor, or that they can listen to the wisdom of a stone, which to me seem like perfectly sensible, true things. Do you have any advice to someone who hears that and can't connect to that idea?
Well, yeah, I do. I think my people, the Dene Nation, have always known that stones are sacred and stones can heal, as evidenced by our lavish use of turquoise and silver. Our people also knew that silver was a conductor of energy, which any physicist would agree. And so when we combine turquoise and silver together, we're not doing this ignorantly or naively. We know what it's doing. And this is on a very physical level. But there are certain things that you cannot teach on a podcast, and you cannot teach with words. They are things you have to be felt. And these things are felt through very special things. I would say sacred things, but I think special is a word people understand more. Very, very special. In the sense that there is a presence that loves us deeply, more deeply than you can imagine. And there is a presence that is fighting for us every day of every week, of every month, of every year. Every moment, this presence is fighting for us. And it's just looking for windows and doorways that it can adequately flow through to reach us and to reach the world. It can only flow through things that are love, because that's what it is. It's not compatible with hate. It cannot flow through hate because it's not hate. So what is love? Well, this is why you feel so good when you walk into a forest, because the forest doesn't know how to be anything but love. And you could argue, well, the mountain lion eats the deer. Is that love? Well, I would argue, yes, it actually is. It can be, because the lion will never take more than it needs. And that there's a purpose for this circle of life. But the forest is love, and that's why we can feel this presence, because it doesn't know how to do these mind games that we know how to do as humans. And when you sit in front of your grandma, you feel a special presence because she is love. She's lived a life long enough where she has nearly mastered the art of unconditional love. And that's why all of us, almost all of us, with a few exceptions of very mean grandmas, which I know are out there, that's why all of us deeply love our grandmas, because she knows how to hold that force. In Chinese, they call it qi. In India, they call it prana. In Hawaii, they call it mana. In Christianity, they call it the Holy Spirit. And Yoda calls it the Force. But truly, different cultures around the world have words for this presence, and this presence can sit in stones. It's a very basic thing. And so for us as Indigenous peoples, this is not like some woo-woo weird thing. This is like, duh, of course it sits in stones. When are you guys going to figure that out? When are you guys going to figure out that stones hold the presence? And that's why mountains are sacred. That's why you don't go around bulldozing and exploding mountaintops. That is not what you would do to your grandmother. That's what you're doing to the mountain. Because the mountain is our relative. It holds the ancestors. It holds that presence of love. And that presence of love is responsible for all life. And so, yes, you can destroy it. We've been given free will to do whatever we want. You can use your free will to destroy it. But if you destroy the foundation of love, which is the foundation of life, you will compromise your own life ultimately. And that's what we're seeing. We're destroying these things that hold life, that hold love. And we can pretend like it's someone else's life and doesn't matter to us. We can pretend that for a few decades, maybe even a century and a half or 2 centuries, but it will ultimately catch up with us. And we're learning on a mass scale what my ancestors learned on smaller scales, which is that if you destroy your own umbilical cord, you will die. And that's okay. That's a lesson. That's a lesson we needed to learn, apparently, because apparently we didn't know. But we're learning it, and we're about to learn it even more in this coming century and the century after that. And that's our gift. That's our lesson. And it's going to be a powerful lesson that we will not soon forget.
I'm just letting that sit there with some silence because I think there's a lot of weight in those words. And I didn't expect that the conversation would go in this way, that we would start speaking about sacred stones. But as you were speaking, you reminded me of a memory when I was living in the States. I took a solo trip through Utah and Arizona, and I encountered slot canyons for the first time. And for listeners who don't know what slot canyons are, there are these incredible landscapes where water flows through stone and carves passageways that can sometimes be so narrow that you need to walk sideways through them. And there are these really beautiful liminal spaces. It's in between open and closed and light and dark and movement and stillness. It's a very unique space. And I remember when I was moving through these spaces and exploring them, I felt this sense of reverence and that something special was happening there. And there was this sense of it being sacred and alive. The textures and the colors, especially as the sun was setting, the glow and the resonance and the way that sound moved through them. It was impossible not to understand that something very beautiful and sacred was happening there. And these were located on Diné land. And so I imagine that these are also sacred places for your people.
I mean, arguably, every place is a sacred place. But yes, there are some places where we've been praying for thousands and thousands of years that have built up that energy so strong that it is maybe just an extra sacred place. But every place and every person is a sacred place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good that's a good reminder. Actually, you just reminded me of another thing that I wanted to ask you about. I was recently speaking with Ethan Tapper. He's a forester from Vermont, and he mentioned that he was on a panel with you, and he said to ask you this because he's like, I think she said this and it was so great and beautiful, and I want to know. You had said something during this panel where you said that your work was about freeing people from the existential shame of being human.
Correct.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful way to put it. And what you're talking about now, about everything being sacred and everything being special and everything being beautiful, I think fits into that piece.
Yeah, I mean, that comes from my own shame because I was born into a community of drug dealers. My father was a drug dealer. I started doing drugs when I was 13. My father started drugging me daily when I was 13. Sorry, I started doing drugs when I was 11, but my father started drugging me daily at 13. I had all kinds of terrible things happen to me when I was drunk and on drugs at these parties, and I blame myself for all of it. And indeed, I did make huge mistakes. I did stupid things, terrible things, and I was a big ball of shame, as many of us are actually, and that's exactly what the other side of the spiritual world wants us to feel. Because as soon as we're in shame, we tell the Creator implicitly, "I am not worthy of your love." And Creator is so kind and so respectful that Creator will always respect our boundaries. And if we're basically saying, "I am such a terrible person, I'm not worthy of anything," then Creator can no longer come in and help us, even though it wants to desperately. And so undoing shame is also undoing those walls that we've built up against the Creator. And the way we do that is by understanding that Creator's love is unconditional. It doesn't have to be earned. It's not something that loving presence I'm talking about, that is Creator's love. And yes, it comes through the trees, it comes through the mountains, it comes through your grandmother, it comes through anybody who's willing to love you in that moment unconditionally, but it is sourced from this creation source. And when we understand that that love is unconditional, we realize that it doesn't matter what we've done, which I know sounds crazy because we live in such a punitive society.
Mm.
But that even though I had done so many drugs, even though I had done so many stupid things, Creator picked me up and said, I love you and I'm sorry for what has happened to you. And I'm here for you. And if you still want to be a part of my army of love, I have a place for you. And when I felt those truths, I was so overwhelmed because I didn't think I deserved to be in that army anymore. But when they said I was allowed, that's when I popped off, and that's when I couldn't be stopped. And that's when I started being super useful to my people, which is all people, and my Mother Earth. And I could have never done that. I would have stayed a drug addict. I would have stayed a self-loathing shell of a woman if I had never understood that I was allowed to step out into the light again, that I was allowed to be forgiven for all of my horrific mistakes, and that I was needing to love myself also for the ways that others had harmed me, and to heal from that. And so I am a microcosm of what humanity is also experiencing, of like, oh, we're so bad, we do wars, we kill children, we are an ecological catastrophe, we destroy everything everywhere we go. And so a lot of my research into indigenous food systems is like, do we? Do we destroy everything everywhere we go? Because I actually have a lot of evidence worldwide of times when indigenous peoples worldwide, including in Europe, I have Norwegian examples, I have Druidic examples, I have all kinds of fascinating examples, when we chose to be of service to the land. And we only chose usually because we made the mistake of not being of service to the land, and we realized that that didn't work. And so that trial and learning period is a part of our nature. And so the same way I had to let go of my shame as a microcosm, and by the way, I've been sober for 13 years now, thank God. Literally, thank God. It is definitely God or creator, whatever you call it, that got me out of that. So too does humanity need to shed this existential shame of being human and see our beauty and not give in to this lie of original sin, which Jesus never said, by the way, and to remember that it's actually original beauty. That we were, as my mother says, we were born into beauty as beauty for a joyful life. But that's actually the playbook here, the program. That's actually what's going on. And of course, the other side of the spiritual world doesn't want us to know that, because then it doesn't have its power, which is a whole other conversation. But it's really important for us to know that we are beautiful. And I'm sure it's no coincidence that my Dene ancestors are people of all about beauty. We call it honjon. The beautiful feeling you feel when you remember you're an intricate thread in the tapestry of gorgeous creation, and that you belong there, and that you're indispensable there, and that everything else is also indispensable as well. And the sheer beauty of it all overwhelms you to tears. That's the meaning of honjon. And so I'm sure it's no coincidence that a lot of my research focuses on beauty, and the beauty of creation, and the beauty of humanity, and the beauty of ourselves. And one of the beautiful things we do is we stand up, and we are brave, and we are courageous, and we stand for what is right. And there are many, many, many beautiful people doing that today. And we must continue to do that in a safe way that protects ourselves and our families, and in an effective way that protects future generations.
Again, I'm just honoring that with some silence. And yeah, thank you for those beautiful words and bringing your beautiful vibrations to this conversation. I know we're nearing the end here, and there are things that I wanted to cover that we didn't get to, but I don't want to go over. So I like to give the last minutes to you, to give you space to see if there's anything that you wanted to talk about, but didn't find an opportunity to, if there's anything that you want people to know about, if there's a place where you want to tell people that they could find you, anything that you want or need, the space is for you at the end.
Well, I do have a website for better or worse. I have social media. I am working on the alternative with certain teams, and I hope we all continue to work towards that. But it's lylajune.com, and most of my handles are just Lyla June, Lylajune. And yeah, I don't actually have anything specific to say, which is rare. So why don't you ask me one of your final questions?
My final question, I guess you kind of touched on it. I wanted to speak a bit about allyship. If people are listening to this and they resonate with what you're saying, and they want to be, let's say, better allies, not just to Indigenous people, but to themselves, talking about the healing and the inner work that you were doing, or they want to be allies to the land and their non-human relatives around them. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what some practical ways that people could enter into allyship would be. Because for me, even I sometimes feel clumsy speaking to someone who's a native person, and I don't want to offend. I don't want to make assumptions. So maybe people have similar trepidations, and they want to enter respectfully into dialogue with people, with non-human people, with energy, with spirit, with source, with creator. How can they practically do that?
Well, I actually taught I think it was a 4-week course on building solidarity with Indigenous communities. Oh, no, it was a 3-week course. So it was 3 Sundays in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And it's through my online school called Rehuman School, which the website is rehuman.earth, rehuman.earth. And we have a lot of really cool courses. We have a Food Warriors course that we're teaching this year. So anyways, it's called Building Solidarity with Indigenous Communities 101.
Amazing.
And it is free. It's also sliding scale if you want to donate for our team that does quite a bit of work to put these things on. But that's a pretty comprehensive overview. But one of the top lessons that we teach people is to ask the magical question, which is, how can I help if at all?
Mm.
So when you say, how can I help if at all? Or do you need any service from me as an ally? And if so, what would that be? You're putting the community in the driver's seat of how you integrate into their community. And I think that's the mistake sometimes we make, is like, oh, I know what they need, or I can do
Mm.
this, or I can do that. Or the other mistake we make is we don't engage at all out of fear, like you said. But I think by saying, how can I assist your community if at all? And they'll tell you. They got a long list of things they need help with. And through that process, well, and then you also say if at all, because you're also saying, look, maybe you don't want my help. That's okay too. But if they do, they know exactly where to put you. And it's an exciting learning journey because you get to be a part of the community on the terms of the community. And you get to learn so much about the community. And you get to be exposed to all these different things just by osmosis, instead of asking, oh, what about this? And what about this? And what's this? And what's this? And what's this? Just observing and doing what they're asking you to do. And you will automatically learn so much. And in that class, I also give a number of like faux pas and like best practices, things to avoid. But there's quite a long list of things. um, so yeah, it was quite a good course, and people really liked it, and a lot of people were putting the training into practice already. So it's pretty cool.
Amazing. That sounds like the exact kind of thing that I was asking about. So I will go check that out myself, and I will put links in the show notes for people to find it as well. That sounds like a great course. So thank you for assembling that. And thank you for everything, for sitting down to speak with me, for sharing the things you shared, for your ability to see the beauty and sacredness of people and place. And yeah, this was a beautiful conversation for me. And thank you for creating that.
You are so welcome. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for your service to our Mother Earth, and have a good day.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener. Thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.